Hey, my friends, how are we today? So, on the podcast, I've got Robert Hill, and he is an adventure elopement photographer. I gotta practice saying that several times. And a business coach. And what I say is, he literally is my brother from another mother because we've had a lot of conversations offline and we have very similar stories. So, I'm so grateful that you're here and I'm ready to talk about mini retirements and money. So thanks, Robert.
I am too. Yeah. It should be an exciting conversation.
Yeah.
Uh, this morning when I was kind of prepping a little bit for today, I was just thinking about just how wild it is how we met and just like the connection of being in a workshop and having some similarities that led to this. It's just wild how the universe works sometimes.
Yep. What Robert's referring to is we were both in a group or like he's saying, a workshop about human design. And we connected because he and I are both generators and we both have a defined head in ajna, which I think is very small, like maybe 10% or something. Don't hold me to the
Yep.
exact number, right? Percentage wise, but a small amount of a small amount percentage of the population. And then we are also really undefined in a lot of other areas as well. And so we have bonded over, our sameness and our differences. And one of the things that we really connected on is both he and I have, I call it like a mini retirement, whatever you want to refer to it as, but basically taking some time off from work completely, not just like, oh, a couple of weeks, but like months, or I think in both of our cases, right, Robert? Years? Several
Yeah.
years?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
been a couple of years now.
Yeah. So do you want to share with the audience, like, how did you come about? Did you even know, like, was it an evolution for you of wanting to take off, or were you just like a hard stop, like, I got to do something different?
Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe it was a little bit of both, honestly. I started my first business when I was 16 years old. I got started pretty young. I feel like I have been fortunate enough to really figure out a couple of things that I really was passionate about at a really young age. I picked up a camera for the first time when I was 12. And it was kind of just I don't know, it just flowed so naturally. I loved it so much. And then when I was 16, I was like, I was a bus boy at TGI Fridays, and I was like, I'm done with this. This sucks. Quit my job. And I was like, what am I going to do? And it was like, oh, well, your camera, like you could totally make money with that. So, I started my business really young. And I think when the mini retirement kind of came about, and that even that term is pretty new for me. I didn't think about it like that, when this happened, but I think I had wanted for a long time. I had had a bit of a dream. And the dream initially was to do kind of the van life thing. I've always been a big adventurer. Growing up on the East Coast, I didn't quite have the opportunity to adventure in the way that I really wanted to. And so when I was in my early 20s, I moved to the West Coast. My whole world opened up. And it was at that time I was like, man, van life would just be so awesome. The initial idea was I would run my business while doing van life. Like I would travel around, and I would shoot, and I would do the thing. And I know a lot of people who have done that. So that was the initial idea, but I think as that evolved over time and as life kind of the stresses of life just slowly expanded and slowly grew and compounded onto one another, it kind of just came to the point where uh, I'd had a really, really deep and very intense personal awakening back in 2016. And that kind of following that was like several really hard years for me. And just when I was getting my feet under me again, COVID hit. And so it was just like another complete blow that required so much pivoting, so much changing. Um, you know, Everything that I was carrying emotionally was coming up, and it kind of just got to the breaking point. My business was stressed, my relationship was stressed, my inner world was stressed, like in so many facets of my life, it was just stress. And so um I think that that was the catalyst. So it was a bit of an evolution over time. It was like I really wanted to take time off. And I think that was part of it as well, was just thinking of how, a lot of people, a lot of people when they finish high school, they go to college. And like, yeah, college, I would guess for a lot of people, I didn't spend very much time in college. A lot of people go to college, and some people are like pretty serious and they like, buckle down and they're like, I'm going to get a degree. A lot of people go and they just party, right? Some people maybe don't go to college. They maybe take a leap year and they take time off. I just never took any time off. And so I think that part of what was coming up for me when everything kind of came to a head was the realization that, um, I continuously perpetuate this idea that I have to constantly be serving people, that I have to constantly be working. Um, and it's funny now diving into human design and seeing seeing how all that plays into part. But I think another part of it as well was, I think that our bodies and even our subconscious, um, they are, of course, always trying to communicate to us. And mine had come to the point where it was literally communicating to me, in the form of words, where I just kept in the last season of life before I left. I just kept saying, I don't want to work. 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 I was telling everybody I just don't want to work. Like, but I felt like I had to, and I was stuck in having to work. And then I finally just decided to stop working. And scary as hell to do at first. But the most liberating thing I think I've ever done. I thought it was going to be for 6 months, and it ended up lasting about 3 years. And it turned into a lot more than just living van life for a couple months. And Yeah, now it's definitely something that I'm prioritizing on a regular basis to make happen.
Yeah, I think that, when you say like, I don't want to work, I don't want to work, like we, if we aren't tuned in, which I was not tuned in for a long time, there are those little whispers, right? It was like, you know, and I'm curious, what was it for you, but it was just like this, we go from going to like burnout to like way past burnout, right? Like not
Yeah.
even to the point of like, okay, a couple of weeks is going to do me some good. Like I literally need like complete and utter downtime, not even think, because you literally have to almost like rewire your system from that, like because it's such a habitual thing. I want to know if this was, you felt like this for you, but it's like, it's such a habitual thing for me to think about work, right? You talk about like you'd worked since you were, 16, or you picked up a camera when you were 12. Like I asked my parents the other day, I was like, when did I start working? It's like, oh, when they were 12. I was like, why did I do that? And
Yeah.
it was for the money, right? It was so that I could have things that when my parents told me, either they couldn't, afford it, that I could go and buy the things that I wanted to. And so much so that like, just like you, like I never took time off. I never, even when I was in college, I was that person who was super serious in college, right? Like I'm going to go to medical
Yeah.
school and I'm going to take, 16 hours and I'm going to work 40 hours a week. And just like you look back on it, it's just like, what were you rushing towards,
Yeah.
Um,
No doubt. Oh,
and and so like literally giving ourselves the break that 2 week vacation, a month vacation is not, I don't know what you felt like, but for me, like that was not going to do it for me because there was
no.
so much that I needed, like never had not worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I also, on top of the not working, I I think I've been pretty tuned in from a young age that like I really love doing what I want to do and I don't want to do what I don't want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so in crafting my business, I really crafted my business around that idea. I really crafted my business around like, what do I really want my life to be?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that involved traveling a lot. I was
Mm-hmm.
traveling so much. I was all over the world. I was in the craziest places, shooting some of the craziest stuff I could have ever imagined. Um, and so it was like this weird place that I found myself where there's a part of me that was just like, man, you should be so grateful. Like, look at all the
Mm-hmm.
privilege and all the opportunity and all
Mm-hmm.
the good things that you have that all these other people aren't getting. And like, how dare you, you know, think that you need a break? How dare you need to rest? But it's like I had literally taken what I thought was my dream life and I made it my business. I made it my job. And that's where Yeah, it was like and I think burnout as well. Burnout, I've thought a lot about burnout in the last several years because I feel like I've gone through multiple burnouts. I almost wonder if burnout's just required. It's like part of the creative process almost to some degree. Um, but I've thought a lot about how the way that I've taken this in, the way that I've conceptualized this is that burnout, when people talk about it, they often talk about it in this very one-dimensional way. They
Hmm.
talk about it in terms of work, like
Yep.
you're working too much.
Yep.
And by that, when I say work, even, I mean like with a job,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But for me, and I think it's taken me several years to really be able to like process and work through some things to be able to see this clearly. But my burnout wasn't just because of my business. It was because of so many different areas of my life in which I was having to work so much to upkeep all of it and maintain and make it all work, or try to make it all work together.
Hmm.
Um, and what I didn't realize was, and I even it's funny because I look back now on like certain people that even pointed it out to me, and it's like it was so mental for me at the time that it didn't make any sense. Um, but it ultimately was I was just trying to control so many
Hmm.
things that
Yeah.
like it was like the walls couldn't expand, like there was too much stuff, you know. And and then the crumbling happened. And so it was
Yeah.
like partly a crumbling because of burnout, because of so many different areas of my life, while also needing a break and just needing to like, what if you just didn't work for a long period of time? Um, that led to it all.
Which is like, do not compute to like the Western
Yeah,
society,
exactly.
right? Like that
Yes.
is like a fucking crazy idea that because we have um built this idea around like whether it's work or it's your business, like you're just going to work and work. It's just like this constant climbing that we feel like we have to do versus more so like nature, like we ebb and we flow. And um I call it like always on, always connected, right? It's just like every single part of our life, we're trying to go like 90 miles an hour. And literally, like, it is not a sustainable thing that we can do. I'm curious for you if you felt a lot of proving energy. I know I did. Like, and I had those same sentiments of like, I can't, like, there was almost shame around saying what I felt because, like you just said, like, I should be so grateful. Like, people are this is what people want out of their life. Like, why aren't you happy? What is wrong with you? And so it almost like um made it last even longer because I didn't say what I was actually feeling, or I didn't reach out for help because I was afraid or concerned that someone would judge me, which I was judging myself, right? That I wanted time off. I wanted time to just be. And it's okay. Like we judge, like, oh, it's okay for you to have a hard time, but it's not okay for you to have a hard time, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and so for me, I felt like there was a lot of proving energy that I was doing. Like I have to keep going. I've, come this far, like lots of that versus now it's just like if the body's like, I need a rest, I'm gonna rest, it's just
Yeah.
like dropping that ego part.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there definitely was a lot of proving energy. As I've meditated on that a lot over the last several years, I think that I had a little bit of a unique um, kind of experience with that because on one hand, there was absolutely like a feeling that I needed to prove myself, and a lot in my business, a lot of like the actions I took, the things I did, the pressure I had on myself for so long was because I felt like I needed to prove something. Um, at the same time, I think I was in a little bit of a unique situation where when I first started my business, it was right when Instagram launched. Like literally, Instagram had been around for maybe I bet no more than a year,
So
maybe
give
six
us
months
like
when I
age wise for you. So Instagram was like what, 20, I don't know, what 2013? I have no idea. 2010? I don't know.
um Instagram, I believe Instagram launched. I could be wrong with this, but 2012 is when I got
Okay.
on it,
So
and it was
you are
brand
how
new.
old? You are how old at that time?
I'm 22 years old.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Instagram launched. I had a friend who was like, "Yo, like you're a photographer, you should jump on Instagram. Like that's where, you would thrive." So I jumped on Instagram and it just made sense to me. Or at the time it made sense to me. Now it's like, what does any of this mean? Uh, but it made a lot of sense and it felt good. And so like I just really started to pump into Instagram, and my work just really started spreading and really started blowing up. And so I grew up on the East Coast. I was in a small town like most of my life. I was a small town kid, and I started my business, started posting on Instagram. All of a sudden, I'm getting thousands of followers, sometimes a day. Like it was
Mm,
just rapidly growing. Um,
mm-hmm.
and within 8 months of my business, which like was rapidly growing, like I mean, I had so many bookings within the first year to 2 years of my business that I was immediately like, I have to quit my job. Like I can't do both. Like it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so within about 8 months of running my business, I got booked for my first international shoot. And then that just took off like wildfire, like in terms of traveling. And within about a year, my wife, we had got married the year prior in 2012. Um, we kind of decided like, let's just sell everything and go travel, and I'll shoot and we'll just go travel because we can. And that just took it all like to the next level. It just amplified from there. So then we we're traveling for a full year. I'm shooting all over the place. Then we end up moving to the West Coast. The travel and everything kept going. So I kind of got almost slingshot into the spotlight a bit,
Mm-hmm.
where I had all of a sudden um, tens of thousands of people following me on Instagram. I'm working with pretty high end clients, making more money than anyone else I knew in photography, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was just like, what's going on? How is this all happening? And how can I possibly keep up? And there was no keeping up. It was the analogy I sometimes will use is like, if you're ever uh uh yeah, I'll just tell you the story because it's funny too. Me and my buddy were when we were young, we decided, me and two friends, we decided we were going to skitch behind someone's car, which basically is being on a skateboard holding on to like a rope or holding onto the car behind the car. So my
Yes.
buddy's driving, me and my best friend are on skateboards holding ropes that are attached to the car. We're going like 25 miles an hour probably. And I see
This
my
is like
buddy
fail
start to
army
swerve.
material.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see my buddy start to swerve and I'm like, "Oh no." And he bails, hits the ground, is just absolutely wrecked. And in my brain, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have to save him." And so I decide to jump off my board, and you can't just jump off a skateboard at 25 miles an hour. And so it became one of those like you're all of a sudden running faster than you actually can run, and I just like slid into cement and into rocky cement. It was brutal, but that's like kind of the analogy that I think of with this, because I felt like what I ended up getting launched into, it was so much more than what I was um in energetic integrity being able to. I didn't have the capacity
To
for it.
withstand. That is the word I was going to use, is like the capacity, right?
Yeah,
Like we
yeah,
want these things, but like, do we actually have the capacity
totally.
to
Yes.
like, do we have the staff? Do we have the nervous system to handle it? Do we have,
Yes.
just all of the
Mm,
areas of our life to be able to handle the level that
yep.
we grow to so quickly,
Yeah.
and if we don't, right, like something's got to give. And yeah, it's and the other word that comes to mind is like we're like swept away almost, in a way. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
what it
Yeah.
feels like, right? But it's just like you're just like
Absolutely.
kind of just wherever, because the systems aren't in place, the staff for you, the support for you, just like all of it isn't
Yep.
there to support you as you grow.
Yep. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
There was not enough capacity. I think it's funny. We live in a culture where it seems like every week online, I see something that's like, here's how to go viral, or like, here's the formula. We figured it out. And it's like, do you actually want to go viral? Do you actually want what that brings for your life? Like, I think we think that we do.
Yeah.
But like you said, like, and it's funny because I've had to learn these things. Like, my nervous system did not have the capacity for that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's where the proving energy came in, was like, once I
Mm,
was propelled into that place,
I got to
it
keep it
was like,
up.
oh my God, I have to keep this up.
Yeah.
And that's where it was like, go, 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 go all the time. My mind was so, I had no control over my mind whatsoever. I had no, yeah, it was just constant frantic, constant stress, constant anxiety, constant overwhelm. Um, and I had even reached out for help. That was the other thing, is I invested so much money in help, and there was, um, it's funny how like I didn't actually start to understand the nervous system until it all got wrecked,
Mm.
until it all came back to like rock bottom. That I actually was like, oh, this is how you build capacity. This is what
Mm-hmm.
we need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because asking for help didn't help at the time. I don't think that there was help I could have had.
I was going to ask you too, like, because money is some of our favorite conversations too. So did you feel like you had the capacity to handle
No,
the amount of wealth that you generated as quickly as you did?
I think had I would have managed it completely different.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah,
And
not at
and
all.
also, right, like looking back now, like I'm sure you probably look at it from a place like, but I had to go through that now to be
Oh yeah,
it in order to be able to build what I'm building now from such a different energetic space.
totally, totally. I mean, it's I'm so grateful because I think I'm very deeply anchored into the truth now that like we go through hard shit in our lives because, you know, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 10 years, however long it takes for you to get through the thick of it. All of that stuff's happening because it's setting you up for the next season. I fully believe that. And I don't believe I'm even fully in the next season yet. Or if I am, I'm on just the starting cusp of like starting to finally gain traction again. Right. Um, but I think that's so hard to see when you're in the thick of it, because as somebody who didn't have the capacity for all the things that were going on, um, it, I think that there is an element to it where you start to, I mean, every bit of conditioning, every bit of toxic shadow that you have going on inside of you, it starts to emerge, and it comes out in so much self-judgment.
Mm,
Um, so I think I did feel a lot of guilt at times because I was looking around and like, I mean, I flew first class on every flight. I traveled 100,000 miles a year to on most of the continents. Like I was all over the place living these lavish situations. And I think there was guilt that came with that. But I think even more than that, it was how much I beat myself up internally through that process
mm,
because I didn't have the capacity and because I didn't understand, oh, you're just dysregulated right now. Like, and I
mhm,
didn't know how to regulate.
mm,
Luckily, I found tools as I went, um, but um, but the tools that I needed at the time were not the tools that I had. And even if I had the tools, I don't think that it didn't happen like that because it wasn't supposed to.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, it was all supposed to happen.
And I think, like you were saying about yes, everything happens exactly as how it's supposed to. And like, even if you did have the tools, like, did you actually, like, you were going 90 miles an hour? Like, the tools can only be as much as what we're willing to receive. And you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, if
Yep.
we're just in this, like, gosh, what comes to mind is like a dust storm. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's just
Yep.
this thing that has just taken on its own persona or own um identity, right? And I don't think a lot of people or enough people are talking about, you mentioned like going viral or, all of this stuff. It's like, but
Hmm.
at our identity, like we need to change our identity at that level. Like that's what has to change first. And then everything else is like a byproduct because of that
Right.
versus, I don't know if you, but like for me, it was like the back asswards way, right? And then me being like, oh, okay, got it now, right?
Yep.
Like, okay,
Yep.
I've got to change who I am as a person, right? Versus thinking that I'm going to fix all of these external things. This is what, and I mean, this
Yeah.
is our culture, right? Like, I mean, I don't have TV, but when I go to the gym, it's like constantly pharmaceutical ads, or they're telling you there's something wrong with you. It's just like,
Right.
we live
Yeah.
in a society of like, this is what's wrong with you. This is what's wrong with you. This is the quick fix. This is how you get better versus like, I mean, I think Alex Hormozy said it. He was like, you can't make money on meditation. I mean, I don't necessarily think that's entirely true, but like you can go get
Right.
an anxiety pill. Meditation isn't, and
Yep.
so this whole, which I think as a society, I think we are changing, right? Like that shit's not working anymore, right? Like all of the all of the drugs, all of the outside external things we've been trying to pacify ourselves with, it's not fucking cutting the mustard anymore. And
Yeah.
so, really doing that, the deep work that takes time, that isn't, in our society sexy, or, you
Yeah.
know, um, and that it requires us to be really vulnerable, I think we're on the cusp, or the tip, I should, or when I say tip, at the beginning, right, of going up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. And one of the things that there's a couple things that came to mind as you were sharing there that uh one, the thing that really started to shift all of this for me, um, there's a guy in the business world, who's really well known. Most people, if you've been in business for a while, you've probably heard of him. His name's Simon Sinek. Um, and he has a book called Start with Why.
yep.
And um, when I saw Simon's TED Talk and I started reading his book, it was at that moment that I started to ask that question of like, why do I do what I do? And being that I did not have an answer for that, I could not answer that quickly. I could not answer that clearly. Um, Going down that rabbit hole, which is an endless rabbit hole. Um, uh, Looking back, I'm like, if I would have just known then that, like, if you can't answer that question now, like, take a pause, like, take a complete pause because, whew, man. But that ultimately was kind of the catalyst to this entire crumbling that I experienced, because I just didn't, I understood, I knew the importance of what he was saying, but I couldn't answer the question. Um, and I think another point that when you were just talking, something that came up as well was when you were talking about the dust storm.
Mm.
Something that I did not, uh, I had very little information about the nervous system years
Mm-hmm.
back.
Yeah.
And now it's like at the forefront for me in terms of what it is that I'm working with people on, or what I'm sharing up front, and really like bringing into the awareness of other people, because it's not a very popular topic. I mean, I think once you start to dive into it, you're almost like, whoa, there's a lot of people talking about it. But if you don't know, you don't see it. Um, or at least that was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I did not realize, I went really deep. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I went incredibly deep into studying polyvagal theory. Um, and the things that I didn't realize were that your entire perception is filtering through neuroception first. So everything that you experience is coming through your nervous system first, and then it's going into your head. So like all the stories you have, like story follows state. The stories that you have about life and about yourself are ultimately going to follow the state of your nervous system. So if you're beating yourself up, or if you are really negative towards the outside world, it's just a sign that your nervous system is dysregulated. And the other piece that really just hit me like a ton of bricks was that when your nervous system is dysregulated, you don't have you can't take in new information. And so you can't actually, even if somebody was to give you the knowledge or the
Yep.
information or the awareness, you
Yep.
can't actually capture it because of how dysregulated you are. Um, and I think one of the funniest things for me in regards to all of that was my journey with human design, because I
Mm-hmm.
knew of human design a decade ago. I
Mm-hmm.
originally learned of it a decade ago, and
Mm-hmm.
it kept coming back into my awareness, like so
Ready now?
synchronistically in this wild way, wild way. Um, and and it wasn't until I started to actively regulate my nervous system that human design finally started to make sense, where I went,
Yeah.
oh my God, like it's right there.
Yeah.
It's been right there the whole time. Um, and yeah, I just don't think that there's a lot of people that talk about the difference between us living in a society of people who focus on time management versus living in a world of people that focus on energy management, because energy management changes the whole game, how it is that you're actually able to step in and create what you want to create in your business, because you only have so much time, but time, you're not bound by time. Like
Yeah.
time is infinite when you have the energy to do all the things you want to do.
Yeah.
Um, and it moves in the exact way that you really want it to when you actually feel grounded, when you feel regulated, when you feel at home with yourself. And so, yeah, going back to what you said, like I'm so grateful for all of the complete shitstorm that came at me and that sent me on this incredibly shame-filled spiral down of just really looking at all of my shadow, because it has changed my life in so many ways, that now I'm just like, oh, I just needed to like get down here and armor up a little bit. Now we're ready to get back in. Let's
And now
go.
you can see it. You were saying, and I don't know if you said these exact words, but like your sympathetic and your parasympathetic state, right? Like your
Yep.
polyvagal theory. And I always just talk about it, same thing. Like most of us are in a survival based state, right? Like in the sense of like literally fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right? Like that is
Yep.
our normal state of being that a lot of us exist in. And then we want to know, like you're saying, well, I don't understand why, like talk about like I did it back asswards. Like, of course, like with, now that I'm building my business, I see people ask questions and I'm like, you can totally see, right? Oh,
Yep.
they just are not, they're not in that creative state yet, right? Like they're still in that survival state, which I used to, and don't get me wrong, like I go back into it, right? But like where I'm building my business from now, which is very much so creativity, right? Like,
Yep.
and regulated for the most part, right? Like I
Yeah.
flip my lid, right? I'm a human,
Sure.
but
Sure.
where my existence and my being is not from that survival based of like you don't ask questions, or you don't when I say you don't ask questions, like the questions that I used to ask, I don't even think of asking those questions anymore, because that it just was showing me like, oh, how much it was survival versus you just ask different questions. You are a different person when you have
Yep.
a regulated nervous system. And I'm so glad you said that, because I think the coaching industry, right? Like I kind of came
Mm.
into it.
Mm.
Well, we're going there. If you're okay with
Yeah.
it, we're just
I'm going.
we're just going there.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I at the time, like how you said about your business, right? Like I needed a very logical, rational, because I wasn't ready to receive the message of being in my body, right? Like
Yep.
wasn't ready to receive it. And after I took time off and I saw how dysregulated I was, and shit wasn't, like you said, like you kept seeing human design, like stuff kept popping up for me, but I wasn't ready to receive the message or be with it until I took time off. And I'm like, okay, right? Like now
Yep.
everything is raw and, in your face. There's nowhere to hide. Here it all is when, the being in my body is what I call it, right? Like really
Yep.
started doing that somatic work. And like you said, I don't think a lot of the coaching industry talks about that, because I don't think a lot of the coaching industry actually is in their body, right? It's like the same
Mm.
thing that I say about money. We can talk about it from theory, but like how many of us actually have a good relationship with money? It's one thing to talk about it in theory, it's another to embody it, live it, breathe it, be it,
Yep. Totally. Yeah. Oh, that's such a big topic. I, I, I really do think that you are right. Um, about the coaching industry. I really feel like, um, I feel like in my experience, I have worked with so many different coaches, and, being somebody who I've been into, the personal growth, self-help space since very early on. Like, I was enmeshed in religion as a kid. But even with religion, like religion's still a part of the personal growth space. It's like, it's like another thing, right? And so And I wasn't, dabbling. I was in it deep. And I was journaling and I was like, going through the motions, but also like on my own personal journey with it all as well. And like getting in deep conversations with friends from an early age. And so I've spent so much time in so many different areas of the personal health and self-help space. And it's funny how my journey of crumbling and even leading to a mini retirement, how much it coincided with me becoming a coach.
Mm,
Because when I first started my business and everything took off, I all of a sudden had so many people reaching out to me asking me to teach them.
mm, hmm.
And I was like, cool, another way to make money. Let's do this. I'm an open book. I'll share. But what I didn't realize until I started doing it was like I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Like I don't have a clue how to teach what I'm doing. I don't have a clue to truly explain how I got my business to where it is. Um, and it's like I could feel it, but I had no words for it.
Hmm.
And I think that, you know, starting with teaching and starting with mentoring, I then learned about coaching and I was like, oh, coaching, awesome. Like that's a very big flip of a switch. Mentoring and coaching is very different. The difference of I'm going to tell you what to do or I'm going to give you advice versus I'm going to coach you. I'm going to draw it out of you. I'm going to draw your truth out and help you start to take your own steps. That was a really, really hard shift for me when I started making that shift. But when I did, and when I started really studying coaching, it was so mental. And with where I
Hmm.
was at and how dysregulated I was, I think it really amplified a lot of things because I was
Yeah.
constantly trying to figure out the answers. I was constantly trying to figure out what's the right way to do something. And of course, trauma is involved with all of this, like, conditioning and trauma and all of that's playing a part with all this because, of course, your nervous system. But yeah, I think something that I am so grateful for when it comes to that, though, is I've heard this idea in the business world a lot over the years of people who talk about, when you're building a business and that sort of thing, like what pisses you off? Like, what do you really like? What are you going after that you're just pissed about? And I think as a coach, like that's something I'm pissed off about. And I hope I don't ever stop being pissed off about it because um I know the pain that it causes when you believe that you just don't have the right mindset.
Mm,
Like that is just wrecking.
yeah.
Um, and if there's just one thing I just am going to continue to pass on to people is like there's nothing wrong with your mindset
Yeah.
whatsoever. It's just your nervous system. Your
Yeah.
nervous system is dysregulated. Thus, your mindset is going to be all over the place. And you're not going to be consistent. You're not going to be disciplined. You're not going to be able to. And I think even bigger than that, I, in this whole journey I've been on, when I first jumped in and I studied business and I did mentoring and then I did coaching and all this, it was so much from a psychological perspective. And over the last 3 or 4 years, that has just expanded so expansively to realizing the nervous system, starting to be able to understand human design and see more of a trifecta that I work with personally now, which is that there is a psychological aspect to it, but more so than that, there's a somatic and there's an energetic aspect. And you really need all three. And I just don't see a lot of people talk about this, but you really do need to understand your energy. You need to understand your nervous system and you need to understand psychology and persuasion and all of the things that go into building a business, because if you just have the mindset part, which is the one that everyone thinks that they need, funny, um, you're just missing two core aspects that aren't actually going to get you to where you want to be, that aren't going to get you to a place of lifelong sustainability, lifelong passionate, expansive growth in the thing that you're creating. Or at least in my experience, that's been the truth. So yeah, the coaching
I
industry, I think, is definitely pushing that.
I agree with that. And like I wrote down two things I want to say is one, learning about human design. Like you and I had an offline conversation about like how pivotal it has been, for us, and like how can you not, I mean, and I, I think you can go down the rabbit hole of human design, and I'm not that type of coach. Um, and I for sure am like your strategy and authority and like highlighting the things, right? And well, actually three things now. One is we can get so hyped up in the very minute details of human design that we don't go back to talk about our energy, right? Like, what is your strategy and authority? Like, before we want to go
Yeah.
down all of the rabbit holes and like all of the things with human design, like, are you actually following your strategy and authority? Full stop,
Yeah.
period, right? Like,
That's
end
all
of
that matters.
sentence. And I think with the even with, I mean, we can do this with human design, right? Like, you, even the human design craze right now, right? It's like all of this information, but it's like we haven't even fucking embodied our strategy and authority. What are we talking about, circuits and channels? Like, we've got to
Yeah.
like own, we have to
Yeah.
own our strategy and our authority. Along with that, I want to say, learning about having a defined head and ashna. Of course, mental coaching took me like in a fucking just circle, right? Because it kept me
Mm,
in my head so much. And once I learned that,
mm,
it was almost like such a huge aha for me, because it was like, oh my goodness, like this somewhat explains, like, it took me out of my body. You're asking me in my head, right? I already have that wide split that is so easy for me to do already, right? And
yep.
so I just want to say to each of you listening, no matter if you have a defined head or ajna or not, like, just obviously it comes back to the body, but like knowing, like, where are you defined, where are you undefined, talking about like what Robert's saying is like that energy, because that was huge for me, of like learning about that and being like, oh, okay, right? Like, that's not how I need to be making decisions. I don't need to be explaining myself, because that further takes me right back up into my head. And then in regards to like coaching and somatic work, and it's like, I wrote down it there's not a lot of us that are willing to be really vulnerable. I remember a coach that I was following, she had had a conversation with Ryan Daniel Moran, and he had said something about, he was asking her something and she was like, oh, I still have all of that. I still feel all of that, and think the thoughts that you think. I just do it behind closed doors. And I'm like, who's
Mm,
talking about this stuff, right? Like, I don't think we need to, in the middle of something and processing something, yes, you do need time to process it. You don't have to share it with the world. And also, more of us need to see, what does that process actually look like, right? Like, how do
yeah.
you process? How do you get in your body? What does that actually look like? And that, I think, allows a level of vulnerability that I don't think a lot of, maybe in the coaching industry, that many of us are willing to be,
Yep.
because it's messy, right? It's the messy middle. It's going to look different for me than it will for you. And like, are we willing to just be like, you just got to try shit out, and like what works for you and what doesn't?
Yeah.
And I don't think that a lot of us are, like you say, talking about it, being willing to be vulnerable, to share, like, yeah, like, I'm in the thick of it. I think so many coaches come from like that, like, I'm the coach and you're the client, versus like, no, I'm going to sit here with you, and you know what, I might cry with you too, because human to human, this is some tough
Mm,
shit that you're going through, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
hand on
Yeah.
heart. And I don't know if a lot
Mm,
of the industry is willing to do that. No, it makes me cry right now
yeah.
just thinking about it.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've cried with clients on a call,
Yeah.
but because of what I and this wasn't because of a coach or anything that taught me this. This was just because of where I was at. I always thought that this isn't what I should be doing.
Oh, I've heard that so many times, right? Like,
Is that not crazy? Is that
yes.
not freaking
And
crazy?
I
Like,
judged myself because I thought something's wrong with me, because literally I would sit across from people and I would cry with them, because I'm like, because you're supposed to
yeah,
take care of all your shit before you get on the call. It's like, you don't get to take care of the human goes with you everywhere.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's really all that we're trying to do is be more human. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it's been interesting. I love that you said what you just did because something that something that hmm, I don't have a clear path with where I'm going to go with this, so I'm just going to kind of start spewing. But I I think that there is, when it comes to coaching, I think everyone's in a different place. Everyone needs a little bit of a different thing,
Yep.
and I think that that has its own unique challenge to it. And I say that because the thing I want to be aware of going forward in learning what I've learned, is it's very easy for us, just as humans. I think this is just natural to being human, that once we start to understand something, we can start speaking the language of that thing, but people don't understand that language, you know? Like when I talk about dysregulation, had I heard that word 3 years ago, I would have no clue what that meant
Yep.
whatsoever, right?
Yep.
And so there's an element of it that I want to be really aware going forward in in really holding the role of somebody who is coaching or guiding or helping in this way, um, of like how I think it's necessarily I need to come down to your level. I think it's more so I just need to like build a ladder to like get you up to mine, you know? And I think the thing that I have not, or the thing that I have learned in the last several years in exploring all of this, is getting into your body is not necessarily a comfortable thing
No.
whatsoever.
And if I ever
And
alluded
that's,
to that, I am sorry, because that is not the case.
I didn't think you did,
Yeah.
but like, it's just something that now it's like, what would I tell myself 10 years if I could go back 10 years?
Yeah.
What would I tell myself?
Yeah.
Like I in the middle of my mini retirement, I decided that I had this urge. It's something I've kind of wanted to do for a long time, but I decided to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So I
Hmm.
hiked from Mexico to Canada. It took
Hmm.
me just over 5 months to do it all. And it was just before I went on trail that I started to really learn about the body and getting in the body and all of that. And this was kind of like, I almost felt like the trail was a bit of an initiation to that, an initiation into like, we're going to go get really in the body. Like, we're about to do something that's not going to be fun necessarily, or not going to be easy, um, or something that's going to be very uncomfortable. And it was wildly uncomfortable in so many ways, but also so incredible. And I think there's a lot of different ways to get in the body. However, I think when I did the trail, it's so funny how often in my life, I think I'm done with this. I'm hoping, I'm hoping this pattern's done. But I have this tendency to be like, oh man, I just finished some hard shit. Like, whew, I guess things are going to be easy now. Like, and then I just get rocked again by something so much harder. And so now I'm just really trying to maintain, like, we're just going to continuously do harder and harder stuff. Um, and that was my mentality when I got off trail, was I was just like, man, I am in the best shape of my life. I've been in my body. I've done it. Check. Good to
You're like,
go. Everything's going to be sweet. Oh, Jesus. If only I knew. And I genuinely, looking back, I feel like I did this really hard thing of walking across the country with weight on my back to prepare myself to do something so much radically harder. And what that was, I ended up, when I got off trail, I was incredibly dysregulated. I didn't understand the terminology at the time, but that was the experience I had. It was constant stress, constant manic anxiety, overwhelm, triggered all the time, like many times a day, getting triggered by so many different things. Um, and I would say, if there's a word that I would use to notice what, or to explain what dysregulation is, it's reactivity. Are
hmm.
you reactive to what's going on around you, or are you responding like from a grounded place?
Yep.
Responding from a grounded place, you're going to be more regulated, maybe just tapping into sympathetic. But if you're reactive, it's like you're all over the place, right? And so I, at that point in time, I started experiencing immense dysregulation, didn't understand what was going on, started to panic, started to freak out. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. And I ended up reaching out to a woman who I had met 4 years prior, very synchronistically, very randomly in the middle of nowhere in Italy. Um, and I did a session with her uh, back when I met her, and I couldn't even at the time couldn't explain what it is that we did, but she's the only person when I really like scanned out of everybody I've ever come in contact with, who do I reach out to right now? She was the only person that my beingness was like she if she's not the person, she knows where to push you. So I reached out to her and I started doing what is somewhat commonly referred to as conscious rebirthing breath work. And it basically is the process of very expansively breathing for a very long period of time. So sessions are typically about 2 hours long, and you're breathing all the way as high up as you can and then exhaling all the way as much as you can. And in that process of working with her, um, there was two really key things that she pointed out that were just absolutely mind blowing to me. Is one, your life is only going to be expansive as much as your breath is expansive. So if your breath is not expansive, if you shallow breathe, it is going to reflect in your life. And why we shallow breathe is because we are simply controlling our breath. And so as we would get into these sessions, she would be able to tell and she would point out when I'm controlling my breath. And every time that I had to go through whatever I had to go through internally to not no longer control my breath, to really like open my breath up, when you breathe, and I find this so fascinating because I truly believe all of the answers to all of our problems are literally right in front of our face. You just can't see it. But when you breathe through your nose, and as you expansively breathe for long periods of time, you activate your subconscious. You dive into the void of your subconscious, and whatever's living down there is going to arise. It's going to arise in physical sensations, or it's going to arise in energy, in emotion, in energy and motion. And and so I just didn't realize how much fear I was holding in my body. And it's like mentally, I'm like, I'm fearless. I just hiked, I just went through the Sierras. Like I was 30 days in ice and snow with an ice axe. Like I'm not fearful at all. And oh, how wrong I was. And it's funny because, you know, that is kind of the harsh reality that now, based off my experience, when I really talk to people about this stuff, it's like, yeah, the stuff that we're talking about, like if you really want to go do this thing, let's say build a business, like if there's one thing that's going to bring all of your stuff to the surface, I find it's running a business, being married, and having kids. And I don't have kids, so I don't have experience with that, but I just know. Well, I was a kid. I understand. And so yeah, it's like if you really want to excel in these things, it's eventually going to require you to deal with what's going on underneath, whether you want to or not. And if you don't, everything externally is going to just be so stressful and so chaotic, or you're going to keep yourself at a certain level and you'll never break out to a level that you actually envision for yourself or actually deeply desire for yourself. And so, yeah, I think that that's what I am now starting to share with people is like, yeah, if you really want to fix your mindset, it's really fixing your nervous system, and fixing your nervous system is going deeper into what's the energetic charge that you hold in your body because of mostly what happened to you as a child, in ways that you may realize in a lot of ways you probably have no freaking clue. But then as well, just being a human, like being a human is an energetic exchange with an outside world. And that's not always easy, especially in the world we live in. So I think that that's a difficult thing that mentally doesn't necessarily make sense to people if they
Yeah.
haven't had some sort of experience with it.
Yeah.
And people discount it. But yeah, it's not comfortable to get into your body.
Yeah. I think, and I said this before, right? It's like we want the quick fix, but there is no quick fix, right? Like the stuff that has the staying power, the stuff that actually, when I say matters, what I mean is like helps you, right? Like actually you transform things is the stuff that takes, time, breath work, meditation. Like I think playing for me was for sure, I've done the breath work and the EFT tapping. Like those were probably two of my most ways that helped release, and also playing, because we have
Yeah.
so many, talk about being a child, right? Like we have so many thoughts around our worth and our lovability and our deservedness. Like we have to earn it, right? But when you go play, like that talk about brings up all the
Yeah.
shit that you didn't even know exists. It's like, what? I can just go play. Like, well, I didn't work today. I didn't, like all of that stuff that's just like you said, simmering right there. It's there
Yeah.
for us. Um, and going back to like you said, being regulated, that's like, are we aware of enough to see it? I was going to say also is that, everything, we didn't even, talk about money, but like everything started off as a way to empower us, right? Like I think the coaching industry originally started off as a great way to empower us. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
us have gotten to that place where we have become disempowered, where, I mean, I know I've done it, right? Like we we look outside of us and we think someone else knows better than us, right? Versus we are the ones with the answers. We are the ones that know what it feels like in our bodies, and really tuning into that and trusting that above anyone, anyone else, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so, yeah, bringing it back to the body. I mean, I love when the body keeps score. It's just like, oh, I know what I was going to say. People are like, oh, I haven't had trauma. It's like, if you're a human, you've had trauma, right? Because the way that Gabor
Yep.
Mate talks about, right? Like, it's just
Yep.
basically, if
Mm.
you have denied yourself, right, of who you are to get love from someone, to get approval, like that is trauma, right? Like that is the separation from ourselves. And so, I used to, I mean, I totally thought before, learning about money trauma, I just was like, well, I had a good childhood, whatever good is, right? It's like, not really, Aaron. Like you grew up in a rather volatile house of your parents yelling at
Yeah.
you, or yelling, just yelling in general, fighting all the time, trying to make sure that everyone was happy. Yes, of course. Like we've all experienced it. And whether we are aware of it or not,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
Yeah. I think it's, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if the willingness, because I find so much comes back to willingness, like if the willingness to explore your trauma, explore, what's going on underneath. Um, I wonder how much, I wonder if people don't explore trauma because they don't have a reason to explore trauma. Like, is if you're not somebody who's moving in a direction, if you're not actually like trying to create something in your life that is better than what you currently have, not because right now isn't good enough, but because you're just moving,
Just
you're
evolving and
expanding,
growing.
you're growing, you're
Yeah.
evolving, you're progressing, right? If you're not doing that, then ultimately you wouldn't have any reason to explore those things. And I wonder how much that plays a role in our society, in why it is that trauma is not a very common thing to talk about. And like what you just said, it's like if you deny your trauma, um, I often find people won't deny their trauma as much as they want to deny your trauma because they're
Mm,
comparing it to theirs, their
mm.
unintegrated trauma, which I think is a whole other side of it. That's just like, wow, like we're still back at square one where we started. um, but yeah, I don't know. I think that that also plays a part in it. Sometimes as I've explored what it really means to be a coach and like how to help people, I don't know if the answer is always that people need. I don't know. I'm back and forth on this right now, so don't hold me to this. But I like sometimes I'm like maybe people don't always need nervous system dysregulation. I kind of want to be like, yes, you do, but maybe sometimes people do just need a strategy because they're on their path of, in this season of my life, I know I just want to make more money. So just tell me how to make more money, right? Um, it's
I
kind of
think,
like, well, I could give you a strategy to make more money and you could run with it and it will get you the results. But like, are you trying to make more money in the short term? Or are you wanting to make like a lifelong thing? I have this conversation a lot of times with clients where it's like, are you trying to work or are you trying to do your life's work? Because they are
mm,
two quite different things. And I don't mean that in terms of you're supposed to know, what's the
your
thing I'm going to do for
purpose.
the rest of my
Yeah.
life. That's not
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. As much as like, does what you do really fill you up? Or do you have an end game in mind? I talk to some people who are like, oh, well, I've worked with a lot of photographers and I've talked with a lot of photographers that are like, oh, I think I'll run this for the next 5 years or maybe 10 years and then I won't want to do it anymore. And I'm like, cool, but you don't have to decide that right now. But like, what are we really trying to do right here? Are we just
Yeah.
trying to get short-term gains or are we really trying to create sustainability?
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think it's just one of those looming questions that only the person on the other end of the call would really know what they want.
Yeah, I think that I wrote down receiving, right? Like, what are we at the capacity of, just like I said, like 4 years ago, was not ready to talk about being in my body, right? Like,
Yeah,
and I think going back to like normalizing it, like, I mean, uh, I joke, but like, what does it look like? It looks like crapping your pants, or being on the toilet. It looks like sweating. It looks like it's like all of those non-sexy things that like we don't want to talk about. It's just like that's the stuff that we haven't normalized yet of like what it actually looks like. Um,
yeah,
and I just think that, like you're saying, I think coaching, there's like you're saying, there's levels for everyone. And also if you want long-term lasting effects, I think it's like one of those things of like getting into your body and really, really being able to, when I say be at peace with my body, what I mean is like, it's not a problem that I cry on the airplane anymore. Like there was a point where I used to hide things, right? Or I used to be afraid to show emotion when I was in my body, right? But that is now it's like there's no judgment of what I'm feeling. It's just feeling, right? There's no good or bad, right or
yeah,
wrong. It's just feeling. And
yeah,
and I don't know if a lot of us are talking about, like what does it look like? It looks fucking scary. I mean, like I remember I would like break out in hives underneath my underarms when I was
yeah,
doing some of that deep money work. Um, but nobody tells you that. Like when you look that stuff up, they're like, oh, you must be allergic to this or that. It's just no one's saying like, yeah, could just be, releasing some things that you've held on for 20 plus years. And
yeah,
so I
yeah.
don't I don't think there's enough of normalization. That's the word I'm looking for to
Yeah.
talking about that.
Something that came up as you were saying that I found this to be so wildly fascinating. But when I hiked across the country, that was my first through hike I had ever done. And I didn't know a whole lot about through hiking or the culture of through hiking. Um, but what was so wild about that experience, I think a lot of people, when they think about like, oh my God, you hiked across the country, they're like, wow, you must have seen just absolutely beautiful things. And, um, how courageous you had to have been to just stick it out and stay out there and do all the things. And sure, all of that's true to a degree. But what was most fascinating to me was the community
Mm.
because when you're out there, I mean, everyone's moving at a different speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
some people you'll see once and you'll never see them again. But most people, you typically fluctuate in a bubble. And that bubble has, I'd say, upwards of 3 weeks around it, give or take, where like somebody could be 3 weeks behind or 3 weeks ahead, but all those people, you're typically going to um, experience some
Mm-hmm.
amount of time with those people. And so you meet a lot of people out there. And it was so fascinating and just the most beautiful experience of community I've ever seen because one, you're all heading in the same direction, which is really cool. Everyone's moving towards the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
Two, everybody wants everyone to succeed. Like
Mm.
everyone genuinely wants you to make it to the end. And they genuinely care about you. They're checking in on you. If they got word that you're hurt, or that you're having an issue, the next time they see you, that's immediately the first thing that they're asking, like, "Hey, how's your Achilles?" or "How's your knee?" or "How's, whatever." Um, they're always willing to give whatever they can. Like, it's such no, it's kind of funny because nobody wants to carry any extra weight. So everyone's always just like, yeah, you can have an extra bar, or you can have, this or whatever. It's so giving. Um, but as well, everybody is so deeply regulated. Granted,
Mm,
there's definitely times where you're dysregulated because you're in a really sketchy situation and you see like what that means wherever, but everyone gets through, right? You wake up in a new place on a new horizon every single day, and you set off, and by the end of the day you're so ridiculously proud of yourself and all
mm,
of your friends that everyone is so deeply appreciative of one another and so regulated, so in their bodies. And through all of that, no one is hiding anything
mm,
at all. Like, you know, if somebody's on their period, if somebody shit their pants, if somebody just puked, if somebody's Achilles hurt, if somebody is running out of money, everything. Like, everything's on the table, and everyone is supporting everyone in the best way they can to try and make it to the end. It's
mm,
so it's so good. I'm doing another through hike this year and I'm so stoked.
mm,
Because it's just intoxicating. And I think
mhm,
that's part of what played into my journey of when I got off trail and you get thrown back into society and you're just immediately dysregulated. You're
mm,
immediately thrown for a loop because you're like, whoa, how do I go from that being so good into a world where nothing feels like it is working the way that it should be working?
mm,
And not from a mindset perspective of like, oh, you're being negative Ned, but like, just, it's not really a community of people. We're also scared to talk. We're also scared to share what's really going on, or to be emotional, or to be in our bodies, or whatever. Um, and so I think that that's where this stuff like human design community and, nervous system regulation and trauma and all of these things, I think it's going to be so beautiful to see how this evolves in the next several decades, to
mm,
see, like, does this actually continue in the way that it feels like it's moving,
mhm,
and expand into a more global community of people who actually are opening up and talking, not just privately behind doors, but publicly as well.
mhm.
Um, because I think, I don't know, it's like I have to remind myself of this all the time. It's like, people are looking for answers. They may just not be saying it.
Yeah,
And they're just waiting for somebody to finally say it, you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
Um, and there's such a beautiful humility that comes from getting in your body because you realize the vastness of who you are. You see what you really are. And that's humbling. Like,
yeah.
you can't perpetuate this egoic capitalistic society in the way that we have when everyone's in their bodies. It doesn't work.
Mm, you didn't say this, but you said it. As one of my biggest things is like being in nature. I mean, if you want to talk about, completely minimizing or the ego, right? I mean, you sit and you look at mountains, you realize, or you sit on a surfboard in the ocean, you realize how little you really are, right? Like,
Yeah.
we are literally, and when I say that, I mean, like, we're all special and we're not special, right? But like, we we are a blip on this radar screen of like fast moving time, and you really get to have a perspective. I think nature, this is my belief, like, nature gives us a perspective that we cannot get anywhere else. Of, like you're saying, you're everyone's having to do the trail, everyone's having their own, it is you and yourself and nature, and that is it. And
Yeah.
so I think that, with the community, like you're saying, community and like being in nature, like, we have somehow not prioritized how powerful being in nature is for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Extended time in nature as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
A hike is
Yes.
dope. Super cool. Wow. I did a hike and I saw a waterfall, but like,
Yeah.
immersing. And I think that plays a part in it too, because I think that, I think, you know, it's so funny that the way that we've been conditioned and built into this society is to think that nature is that thing out there, that nature is
Mm.
mountains and trees and rivers and waterfalls. But like, this is nature. You know,
Yep.
you are nature.
Yep.
It's partly where I think getting in your body is an experience with nature. Um, Nature provides that. If you go get in nature, it's going to force you to be in your body and realize, oh, I'm just part of this whole thing, right? But I I've realized, especially since getting off trail, it was like this very stark realization. And I have even experienced this. I've been off trail for close to, I guess, yeah, like a year and a half now. But I've even realized how this has played into my own life where we are so deeply scared of nature.
Mm.
We are so deeply scared of nature. People don't, sure, going and taking time off, doing a mini retirement, hiking a long trail, whatever the case is, right? There's these fears that come up because of, how would I let go of my responsibilities for that amount of time? How would I let go of making money for that amount of time? How would I let go of all of these things, right? I get that. That is a part to play. And some people don't necessarily have the privilege or the opportunity to do that. Totally get that. Um, and I think the biggest question is like, but how scared are you of getting into nature? Like, what role is that playing in this? Because I can't tell you how many times I was asked, like, people's questions are so funny whenever you're through hiking because people are always asking about animals. The biggest question I get asked is, are you carrying a gun? Which is so funny to me because I'm like, I'm going to the one place you don't need a gun.
Yeah.
We got shootings left and right in the cities, in the towns, but like out in the woods, no one is shooting anybody because everyone's actually in their body. um, but it's so funny how many things people are scared of getting a rash or scared of hurting
Yeah.
themselves or scared of an animal or scared of a crazy person that they imagine is going to live out there because they heard some story of one once. Like, it's crazy how scared we are of nature, how
I
scared
think
we
it
are
just
of
brings
our
up
own nature.
it brings up all of the fear that already exists with us. Like that's what I said about COVID,
Yes.
right? It's just like
Yeah.
COVID just showed us how much fear we already have existing within us all the
Yes.
time because
Yep.
that was just the amplifier for us. And it's the same thing like what you're saying in nature, right? It's like it shows you where are your fears. And
Yep.
yeah, and I think it, like you say, it's nobody is like it's not like Robert and I are these special, unicorns. It's like it's the willingness, right? Like, am I willing to feel what needs to be felt? And I think here we go back to nervous system. It's like we don't have to go from 0 to 100, right? Like 0 to
Totally.
0.5,
You can't.
perfectly okay, right? Like
Yeah.
0.5 is okay and normalizing 0.5, right? Like here we are, like
Yeah.
you hear about people building businesses, air quotes, overnight, right? Like it's like, no, it's been happening all along, right? It's just like, what is the highlight? And so really just normalizing a little bit at a time is just fine. So
Yep. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's not about being willing to do it all. It's really just about being willing to take the next step.
one
You know?
step, right? One
Yeah.
step. And I do think it does get easier. I think my resistance was a lot more when I first got started, right? Like if you think about energy and inertia, right? Like it takes so much more energy to go from a full
Mm.
stop to
Yep.
motion than
Yep.
it does to go from 1 to 50, right? Because
Yep.
you're already in motion. And so being gentle, here we go back to like, how are we speaking to ourselves? Being gentle and kind with ourselves. Like if you're just starting on the journey, going from nothing to one is like everything because it requires such a huge amount of inertia to get started. There's so much resistance and
Yeah.
it's okay, right? Like just get back on the horse, just keep going. Um,
Mm.
it's okay. We all fall off.
Sitting in the resistance. Oh.
Best friends. Thank you, Robert. I'm so, so grateful. We didn't even get to talk about money. That might be another podcast that we come
Yeah.
back on and have a
Definitely.
conversation with. So where can
Definitely.
people find you and connect with you?
So the main place I would say is my website, robertjhill.com.
Okay.
Currently, in terms of January 2024, it's like there's a construction page up. Within a couple weeks, new sites coming, and I'm so stoked about it. I feel like I'm finally gonna have the website I've always wanted.
Mm.
Um, and then as well, Instagram. That's where I also focus a lot of stuff, which is just at Robert J. Hill.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.